and welcome back to We Could Review with Doooovid. Joined here today with our incomparable co-host for what is sure to be an interesting and spiritually fulfilling show. I'll hand it over to you, Doooovid, for the intro, unless you wanted me to play that video before we got started.
Yeah, I think let's start with that video of the chanting, but since you didn't start with that right away, I'll introduce it. I think last week maybe it got a little, less, I don't go out of hand, but less controlled like we usually like it, and maybe because we didn't do the chant, and it's because Vince and Libra both were going to come on, and they both wanted to be off by like 9, and so we pushed them straight in at the beginning, and then we never ended up doing a chant last week. And this week, I just didn't really feel like chanting, so I thought Jennifer a video. This is a famous Jewish singer when he came to Detroit, and I was at the event, and he sang the song. It's actually from Yom Kippur, the Day of Judgment, but in this calendar time, you mentioned last year, the Jews mourn in the middle of the summer because that's the time when the Romans sacked Jerusalem, and so there's a whole like 3-week period of mourning from the time where the Romans breached the outer walls to when they destroyed the temple, and it's culminating this Wednesday with the day where the temple was destroyed, God forbid, and we want to talk a little bit more about COVID-19 and purity standards, but yeah, that's this Wednesday. So this is kind of like a sad song that's lamenting to God that basically I'm nothing, everything is God. My body is just dust, and my soul is God's possession. What am I but to throw my mercy upon God? And within the chanting that I've been saying the last few weeks, having like a kid lead it. So part of it, the purpose is to get everybody chanting together in an active way. So you bring in like a famous singer who travels around, and you'll hear him in the video, like, everybody please, everybody chant now. And then you also have like a little kid, because in Orthodox circles you don't have women singing. Like listening to women singing is considered bad karma, and so you have like little kids singing, also like chanting. I just came from the Hare Krishna temple. If we were to talk about that a little bit, but like singing or chanting or leading prayers is something in essence a little kid could do. Just like the most powerful leader of international Hare Krishna movement, chants Hare Krishna, but like in reality, a 3-year-old kid, maybe a 5-year-old kid could sing the melodies, and so Judaism, even the most like deep mantras from the highest part of the prayer services, like a little kid could chant it and sing it properly, and a lot of times that's a method to get a whole congregation chanting. That like after hearing a kid chant it, and you'll see in the video. So I thought that was a good clip. So please.
All right, here we go. Hey, I just paused it. We got to 24-minute mark there. I just thought I would bring back the show. Great to see the audience members, returning people. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the support. I'm in a great mood today, and maybe there is truth to this whole opening things up with a chant, you know. It sets the intention of the whole thing. Because, yeah, it just got off to that bad start, and it never recovered.
You know, we got Nick in the chat. He got those CDs. I was able to successfully mail them to, near into Quebec, and I got a stack behind me that hopefully soon will be mailed to Quebec. I'm gonna help this young budding entropist musician along his music career by selling him at discount fair market price some of the best of the Western tradition, and
already cornering the entropist market, eh, Doovid?
And make a small profit for myself. And I also have behind me, we're definitely going to talk about the new Stephen Wolfram book. So I was at my dad's house, and I saw my dad had this big stack of the Stephen Wolfram books, and this is from the Fundamental Theory of Physics, and we're going to look at this. This is his new book from Stephen Wolfram on possibly a new mathematical model that could solve all of the problems of physics. And another book, Stephen Wolfram, A New Kind of Science. This one is from 15 years ago. I'm going to try to read this. And my dad had two other books, Stephen Wolfram, Idea Makers, and Stephen Wolfram, Adventures of a Computational Explorer. And because Jennifer has never used Wolfram Alpha, I might even do a quick tutorial.
I might have used a Wolfram book. Sorry,
Alpha.
I might have used
the
Wolfram
definitely want to talk about that. And you want to do your week in review real quick, Jennifer?
I was just thinking I might have used a Wolfram book, to be honest. But I don't think I've ever used their website. So I don't know if it's entirely true that I've never used any Wolfram product, but I'm only vaguely aware of who this guy is and what his company is. So I thought it might be interesting to hear Doovid's mini recap of his knowledge of this, because it's a guy, right? And he's still alive, Wolfram.
So yeah, Stephen Wolfram is a man, and we could bring up his Wikipedia or his own webpage, and here is that big book on physics, free online on his webpage. Most people, if they know Wolfram, know the webpage Wolfram Alpha, which is basically a free webpage that solves mathematical problems, where it has an entry line, just like YouTube at the top of the page, an entry bar, except you type it in proper mathematical notation, and it will solve it, including up to differential equations and graphing and pretty complicated mathematics, and it's free and it's online. And if you're in university now these days, you usually have, especially now under COVID-19, but even me 10 years ago, we had these assignments a few times a week that had to be submitted online. And undergraduate mathematics, you have you want to just bring it up, Jennifer, and do a screen share from your computer of Wolfram Alpha, and just play around. Like you could type in notation like MATLAB or something like that, but you don't need the program MATLAB. You could just open up a tab, Wolfram Alpha, and then you could type in something like integers, derivatives. It's not that complicated if you've used a program like MATLAB or Maple. The way to enter is the same, and it solves them. So it literally, I was a tutor in the University of Michigan Math Lab, just as a good deed. Dude likes to be a good person, and exercise my mind. So when I was in University of Michigan, there was a few semesters where I had hours and hours between my classes, and I was a commuter. So a few hours a week, I would sit in the math lab and just tutor people, help them out with their math homework voluntarily, unofficially. When I took a few classes, I used the math lab for help a few times, but later I just did it as a good deed, and I would inform students occasionally. Sometimes I wouldn't tell them that basically you could just type your homework into Wolfram Alpha, and it'll give you the answer. And a lot of people didn't know this, and so Wolfram is a multimillionaire. He's got computer software that's proprietary that you have to pay for. There's a free web page that's they say the most popular. People know because they could cheat on their math homework on Wolfram Alpha. And there's also like consultancy and something. I've heard estimates that he's a billionaire, although I think it's unclear. It's a private company, but certainly a multi-millionaire. And he streams. He's got a channel, a few thousand views, not huge. It's kind of like him. It's kind of like Doooovid, him sitting in front of books. Are you able to bring any of this stuff up, Jennifer?
Sorry, my computer's having a bit of a hard time keeping up with all the demands between the streaming and everything. So I am working on getting it. It shouldn't take too long. Did you want me to bring up that book or just the general website? I'm guessing you just want the general website.
Well, if there's interest, I mean, we should probably do all of it, and I don't even mind. I mean, I thought.
But you want me to also give my week in review, right? So I could do that just in the meantime. My week has been spent scouring the internet and research to write my latest article. And that is pretty much all I did. And it's an article that I believe one of the audience members, Nicholas Petrus, wanted us to go into it more. It's not really a show about financial stuff, and it sort of is a little bit, but not really. So I didn't want to have that digress because the convo already digressed too much. But I put about 2,000 words out there. Hopefully it's inspiring for people. It's about commerce via silver-backed currency. I'll screen share that in a bit, but for the time being, let's just keep it on the Wolfram thing because I really just like that word. It's German, isn't it? It reminds me of a techno song.
Yeah, I just started researching him, and so honestly, I'm not so sure yet. So, I knew Wolfram was the name of a person, the web page, and I never really thought too much about why this person made a web page that allowed me to just go on to and type my math equations into, and then it would graph it and solve the problems for me. But I used it, and so it wasn't until I noticed my dad had those books. And when I was in University of Michigan, we didn't use Wolfram. Saying our computers in the higher level courses, we usually use MathLab or Maple. And occasionally there's other software, but basically, as Jennifer could tell you, in a good university in the physics program, after the 300, by the time you get to 300 level courses, 400 level courses, most of the homework involves writing computer programs to answer it, and because generally you can't most integrals. That are useful in real life, or differential equations that are useful in real life, cannot be solved using the methods that we use in a college calculus class. Although you could use the estimating method like Euler and Runge-Kutta and these various estimation methods to solve differential equations. But there's computer programs that basically do what you learn in class. We talked about this before, right, Jennifer? Like Runge-Kutta and Euler, and why differential equations are unsolvable, but why the computer could estimate them within 99 point something % of probability, and why higher level physics and math problems basically all require computer programming.
Yeah, I was just looking up. I believe it's Fortran was the programming language they had to learn in computational physics. And another one that came up, this was professionally, was Python. Obviously, C is important.
Well, I'd say most math and physics people use specialty software like Maple or MATLAB.
But yeah, but in terms of what you're
they
talking
might
about,
program also on their own, but like minimally, you don't have to be a computer programmer to write a few lines of code to type in your physics differential equation into MATLAB and get a graph and estimation answer.
yeah, maybe we should explain what the Euler method is so people know what we're talking about. Because it's important and it's hard to explain exactly why the classes of problems that computers solve are only a subset of the total whole field of definable problems. And I've sort of struggled to explain it, but this Euler method is basically, yeah, and Doovid was talking earlier about Runcuta, so that's also mentioned. Oh, sorry, I don't even have it displayed on the right one. Sorry. I'm on the wrong computer share. I've got way too many things open here. Yeah, this is how I get when I'm writing. I become very disorganized. All right, so yeah, we're basically looking at like an approximation to. So you have some data. You're always starting out with some data, or you're starting out with a shape. But usually it's some data, and then you're trying to make a shape that fits the data. And the question is, like, how accurate of a shape do you need to make before it maps to the data so well that it can predict the future array of the data? So that's where you get into these approximations, and it's gradually going to get closer to what they call the limit, which would be the integral, which is the exact value of the volume or area. Well, just think of it as an area under a curve, but more generally, it's a volume. We can't usually take the integral, but the integral is like a super useful construct. So this is the way of like doing almost like a part integration. You're doing like, if you think of integration as an infinite set of steps, this is like doing, 10 steps or a million steps or a zillion steps. I'm not sure exactly how many steps it makes sense. Usually they truncate the set when the next term, because it's always a question of adding up terms, when the next term, like they're ordered such as to converge, I get smaller over time. So when the next term is small enough that it's not really affecting the overall value that much, you just truncate it. It's usually cut off at a pretty low value. But what the computer does here is allows you to speed up the process of creating that approximation. You define the parameters, and then it speeds through the computation for you.
Yeah,
hopefully that was helpful.
And in terms of differential equations, which if Jennifer could bring up Wolfram Zalfran's webpage, or maybe it's not too much for we can review, but most differential equations are beyond solving. So if people in the chat are knowledgeable of calculus, they might remember like the chain rule, or these various rules where you could try to integrate.
Oh my God, I love the chain rules so much. It's just like playing around with the equation, it's like shuffling. It reminds me of shuffling.
So, I mean, when you're in school, you're given equations that are solvable. But, as once you reach like 400 level physics or mathematics, you're no longer just learning how to do it. You're trying to work with actually useful things that describe something in the material realm. And generally, all of those are going to be too complicated to solve these differential equations.
Not anymore. Not with my system. My system reduces it to geometry. And the calculus on geometry, no offense, is trivial.
Well, I mean, that when you have a system, when you have a page like Wolfram Alpha where people could type their equations into for your answers.
It only works in the oral tradition, right? So the typing questions in for answers involves talking to me, which frankly most people are too scared to do, which suits me just fine. But I do respect what he's doing. I'm glad we looked at this website. Was there anything in particular you wanted to go over within it? Or I could pull up the book you sent me, or a PDF, and we could go over that.
Yeah, so this is pretty complicated, but yeah, I think we should look at Wolfram's actual book. So little precursor to you were talking about differential equations in the computer. So anything that's really useful to could like three-body gravitational um, bodies, or even something like a curveball. These can't be solved on paper with conventional methods. And historically, going back to hundreds of years, the Euler method and Runge-Kutta, where you could relatively accurately estimate it. So by hand, it's a permutation, and the more permutations you do of these, different methods, the more accurate you
I
get.
think iteration is a better term. Permutation implies it's a change. I would say iteration.
Yeah, iteration. Sorry, we're going to see Wolfram. It's going to be permutation, but so each iteration will lead to a greater accuracy, and it could be like the first iteration, might be only greater than 50% or 50%, or it might be 80%, but usually after like 4 or 5 iterations, it's in the high 90s. So in theory, you could do this estimate by hand and get a relatively accurate estimation, and that's how we did it before the advent of the computer, and then the super speed computer, where you could do thousands of permutations relatively quickly, and get 99.999% accurate, where you could almost say like you've solved the equation, even though theoretically it's an unsolvable differential equation from our knowledge. But so leading into that, so Wolfram, who we're comparing him to Super Libra, and somewhat like his theory, because like his theory is kind of just like an extreme version of Super Libra's theory, although obviously we don't know much about Super Libra and whatever his bio is, as opposed to Stephen Wolfram is one of the most famous mathematicians in the world, possibly a billionaire, and like a household name, anybody familiar in mathematics. So so Stephen Wolfram, Super Libra might be a great guy, and he's got a theory, but Stephen Wolfram with a theory like this, like we'll show his web, he has a YouTube page, and he's talking to the biggest names in science, like Elon Musk would probably team up with Wolfram and the Harvard NASA team. So what Wolfram has created is basically a way to represent information. I don't even call it like mathematics, how he describes it, like a new language of mathematics that is some sort of graphical representation of functions. And so at the beginning, it's kind of like Libra tier, where just like, who cares? And you could put on the screen share, Jennifer, if you want to show some of these, like this Wolfram's like 500-page book on these permutations. And eventually he's going to claim that this new method of representing information could actually be the solution to the unification of physics and the solution of all world knowledge. So it's kind of like Libra tier, but at the same time, like saying like this guy, Stephen Wolfram, that's he's like he's so I thought it'd be interesting to look at. I don't know how deeply or for much we can review, or what kind of feedback in the chat. I don't know if JF is going to like review this. Maybe I'll go on JF. I didn't reach out to him if this is interesting, and Doovid's the person who knows the most about it, because I doubt Stephen Wolfram will go on JF. Maybe Stephen Wolfram would go on JF. I don't know his politics or anything about him. He's got a channel. He streams. Some of them get thousands of views. So maybe I'll let Jennifer. I asked her to take a look at this, or what she thinks about it, and at least maybe we could try to explain the system that he's creating, and whether we think how much use it has.
Sure, sounds good. I've got it loaded up here. I'm trying to figure out how to make it a little bit bigger, but it's not really responding. But basically, from what I was
able, the book is a whole thing of like awesome graphics. Could you get it on like his cool graphics?
Yeah, I'll try to scroll over to that once I can get this thing under control. Yeah, I got to the point where he was starting to tie things together and literally tie them together. But at least he did what you keep having to remind people to do, which is build the theory up from axioms. So that made it very readable, for sure. But yeah, I didn't really understand the argument behind the axioms because I find a lot of these constructs are unintuitive. So I find it discouraging. Like what was the word that I first got discouraged at? I feel like I'm in the wrong part of the. I got to scroll through like 200 pages to get to where it was you originally directed me. Was it page 273?
No, I don't think so. I mean, if you just want to show a few people what he's doing, I'm saying like, okay, maybe tonight we're not going to go through his model, and maybe Jennifer's just not interested. But like,
No,
I'm
I
looking.
am interested in it. I just thought one of the concepts he introduced right off the bat was unintuitive, and I'm trying to remember what the word was, but I can't. So I'll just pull up some of the earlier diagrams. So it looks like he's talking about mapping. And yeah, can you see what I've got there?
Well, I'm watching on the YouTube. I could see you scrolling, but I mean, you should probably take off. You should probably just do the full screen share.
Okay.
Or just encourage people to, I'll put the PDF in the chat again. But yeah, I mean, Wolfram has, yeah, I guess properly it's a mapping system where he has a set language. So at the very beginning, he defines the terms of like a bracket, like X bracket arrow, implying like X or Z, and then that has a graphical representation, like with nodes and arrows. And so at the very beginning of the book, he starts with the basic axioms of this mapping, not really saying like who cares or why we're doing it. And then he gets into right away these different methods, different mapping, like if you have XYZ, arrow, XZ, YZ, like all these various different ways that you could do this mapping. And then when you do multiple permutation, in this graphical representation, it's kind of like a fractal type math thing, like, oh, it makes these cool patterns. And some of them will be interesting geometric patterns that could be foundational to explaining nature. And so this, whether it means anything, this mapping method is a new way at looking at creating these networks. And Wolfram has demonstrated that some of these networks that are created by his new language of mapping closely parallel certain understandings of physics and different things. And maybe kind of like Libra, he's selling his theory as the possible answer to everything. But obviously, Stephen Wolfram, relatively for someone who's going to propose to do such a thing, probably has from the most authority, even in the whole world. If you thought like, Bill Gates or something coming to speak on behalf of, vaccines and the virus, because he, kind of is one of the more respected voices of science in the world. So in something like mathematics, Wolfram, one, because he made public this free software that's very useful to people. If Jennifer still gets that up at some point to show his free public software that is really just a service to the world. And let alone
which link is it on the main website? Is it technologies or solutions?
It's probably not on his webpage. It's just called Wolfram Alpha.
Oh, okay.
And it opens up a web page like Google, except at the top you type in an equation. And so he has a personal web page, and he has this new physics project where he's recruiting top people to translate their ideas into his new language of permutation. So I'm going to look at that.
Oh my God, it is Super Librix. That's literally the exact same LARP.
No, I'm saying obviously Stephen Wolfram has been around for a long time, and he's been researching this for years. Stephen Wolfram's a billionaire. Yeah, but yeah, it is kind of and that's why I don't want to be harsh on Super Libre. I mean, it might interesting things, but you're saying like relatively, saying like what's he really offering? Like who's going to turn to him when they could turn to Stephen Wolfram?
Well, the nature of the questions that they're answering are not the same. I mean, his seems to be answering like he's trying to fuse ought and is with his like voting system. So I'm not really sure like I even fully understand the idea yet. So
I mean, you listen to him more than anybody, and you're not even really sure what he's talking about. Yet, Stephen Wolfram has a page that's useful to everybody, and is recognized as being, able to solve, like some of the most difficult problems in the world, and he's put it right there at your fingertips, where you could log on to Wolfram Alpha and solve, some of the most difficult mathematical problems in the world. That you would probably need to purchase software to do. Like relatively, like your TI-85 or whatever, calculator probably couldn't solve these integrals or differential equations, and you really need to buy a mathematical software program. So it's I'm trying to emphasize the point that within the mathematical world of somebody attempting to do something, it makes sense that it's Wolfram, and within the mathematics world, you could have your fantasies or whatever, but fact is everyone knows Wolfram.
Sorry about that. Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, Super Librix is trying to answer different questions with a different market. That's all I was saying. And, he's obviously going to be on to something. I just, don't you find it's incredibly confusing, the diagrams and such? Like versus my model.
I'm saying the difference between
everything. Doesn't need these insanely complicated model like graphs. Like my model's so simple and predicts everything. So why do you, like, we don't need to introduce all this other stuff? Because like this would just be like any other geometric argument. It would just be used as an approximation. Because like basically to do this is basically a step up on calculus, because you're taking into account the fact that space-time is entangled. But the problem is I don't think he's making that part of his axiom. I could be wrong. But the entanglement of space-time seems to be something that people leave out of the axioms, but then the results that they get result in this like thing that tends to sort of edge the conclusion back towards that same axiom. So in other words, the truth will come out of it to an extent if the thing is consistent and gets onto the information, because there's this sort of way for stuff to be wrong and still be right vis-a-vis these approximations. You could basically get the math to say anything you want. It's just a question of whether what you're representing is intuitive, and I suppose philosophically, if you care about things like deeper truth, B, is it actually objectively reflecting what reality is? Sorry to get off on a rant there.
Yeah, and I'm just saying, okay, let Wolfram set the standard. So even someone like Church of Entropy or Doovid or Libra to meet someone like Wolfram's standard that he set in putting forward his effort and saying he created his own mapping system, and he almost meticulously went through all the various permutations and what could you do with it and the different basic combinations. And then running those combinations, countless permutations to see the type shapes that they create, and just like, well, who cares? It was interesting, and then you see that his method of permutations could actually create some things that appear to represent fundamental, so to say, shapes. It could be Fibonacci, or even more complicated things like buckyballs or complicated shapes that appear in organic chemistry and quantum physics, where like Jennifer said, it's almost like one step above calculus, where Wolfram's mapping system seems to more accurately represent things that even calculus can't represent. But when you think, okay, Wolfram, he has his book for free on the internet, 450 pages of permutations of his theory. And then, at the end, like 350 pages, and then a comparison to others type theories, and then his explanation for why this might help understanding the fundamental equations of physics, because it's kind of like a new mathematic, a new representation that he feels is going to be the direction. And then, somewhat of an explanation of a project that people could join and use his software largely for free, where he's going to run these permutations for people if they could express their ideas within the mapping logic system that he's created. So maybe, Doovid or Jennifer is smart enough to understand coding enough to express our ideas in a form that could be mapped out according to Wolfram's system, and that what this physics project is, has it helped? Yes, like I have a video. I haven't been able to watch it. Like Wolfram, the Black Hole Initiative, and the various physicists are supposedly stepping forward and saying that yes, this new thing is helpful. So relatively, it could be like in terms of physics and mathematics, this Wolfram's potential project to find the fundamental theory of physics might be the most interesting thing, and like bigger than Hamarov, because like Hamarov is just a doctor, just a professor, anesthesiologist. He's a good man, he's a competent doctor, he's a big scholar, and he, Penrose is a big name. Actually, like Penrose, I think he's a sir. He's been knighted. He worked with Hawking's. He may have been involved. I don't know what awards. But so I don't know if Wolfram has actually, he's like, he may not be like Penrose, but he's different, that he's wealthy. So he's like an Elon Musk in a way that, okay, Sir Penrose, or someone who won the Nobel Prize and they got the $1 million and that was the most money they ever made, versus Wolfram, who, not only you've done incredible things in mathematics and computer programming, but figured out a way how to do it and make himself one of the extremely wealthy man at the same time. So I thought so that might be an interesting direction for the show, and some karma for me that my dad was interested in it, and my dad had those books, and I told my dad I was thinking of signing up to the physics project, and my dad thought that was a good idea. He just doesn't have time to think about science that deeply this stage in his life. As a working full-time doctor and all those other things that he can't really take time aside to armchair physics.
Self-loops. A relation can contain two identical elements, as in 0, 0, corresponding to a self-loop in a graph. Starting our first rule from a single self-loop effectively just stays marking the original node. So yeah, stuff like this is gonna have a period where it's like not very well understood. Like when calculus first came out, it not everybody understood it instantly, but now like basically anyone who has the desire can learn it. So this just like some type of system like this, something where you have to look at things in essentially geometric branching causality, because it's going to come back to a question of where are the information bottlenecks in your system, right? Because if a system has quantum state exclusion effects or Heisenberg uncertainty effects, you need to take more measurements to know all that information, because you have multiple possible answers that you get out of it because of the uncertainty relation manifesting. So whatever it is that we end up with for a unified field model has to take into account this multi-point branching, and the fact that it's going to end up being a statistical argument is going to make it such that you sort of run out of statistical, like you run out of 100% soon enough. So yeah, it's going to be a juggling act, because people need to get their heads around why it is we're using these things, right? It sort of reminds me of, I don't know if you ever did group theory, proofs in group theory or set theory or stuff like that. Epsilon delta, did you ever do that one?
Not sure by name.
Yeah, so it's like, what about proving something is a vector space? No?
Yeah, but these things, you might need to be able to like screen share quickly representations to talk about these concepts, or they may be, these days of technology, you can't really talk about mathematics unless you could have some sort of graphical representation.
Well, I have my notes, but I have to go dig them out. They're not very aesthetic, they're in a big binder, so I don't have to gaze at that every day.
Yeah, it probably doesn't. Maybe have a separate stream on mathematics, although the direction, multiple truth hypothesis. When I talk about different things like truth discovery, I do think I can incorporate Wolfram's mapping system, and it would be useful as a representation of possibly also when I'm talking about multiple truth hypothesis. So this concept of what happens the more times you run permutations, and the different type patterns that emerge when you permeate something many times over again, which how useful is that going to be? And then
I think you maybe want to say iterate, eh? But I just don't want to get confused here. So permutation versus iteration are different. And a permutation implies that there's something changing and churning, right? Like when you think about permutations, it's usually in the context of statistical thermodynamics, entropy, how many permutations of your base materials are possible. It's going to give you k ln omega, right? Permutations implies different iterations, implies temporally different instantiations of the same method. So I just want to make sure we're using the right words, because I just don't want anyone getting confused. Hey, guess who's in the chat?
Yeah, I saw. Yeah, and it's important. I say all the time.
That's pretty good praise, isn't it? This applies to what you're talking about, Doovid, because what you're going to have to do is eventually set up your conditions to prove that something is a multiple truth hypothesis space. And what that was relating to the Wolfram thing earlier was that he's essentially creating something that's like a vector space, but not a vector space, in that it has a different geometry, but it'll have a similar logical architecture. So I just wanted to see if you had ever done anything wherein you establish that something is a vector space. Usually it's R over N. It has to include the zero vector. It has to include the scalar multiples. Any of this ringing a bell?
Yeah. Yeah, I mention all the time that it's like, in the multiple truth hypothesis will also apply to the explanation of material reality, and saying that the solution to differential equations is a vector field, and so the representation and Wolfram's system, although it's more than whatever his intention, if it's just to understand a representation form of vector fields, or generally within differential equations, we can only represent vector fields up to 3 dimensions, which for greater explanation of reality, that's not sufficient. So a mapping system like Wolfram's could be useful for multidimensional or interlinking and different things that are beyond explanations within XYZ axis. And although it could just kind of be like a fantastical like new language, use like some sort of mathematical language and permutations that are just kind of like a video game, ooh, look fun, create your own fractals, and like, does it mean anything? And it's like, well, it's mathematical, it maps out patterns, but like, no, you're not really on to solving the fundamental theory of physics. So and I haven't really had time to read this literature before week in review, but I wanted to mention it, and I will be looking through these books. So I'm not sure how interesting it is to Jennifer, and I might even sign up. I'm not. I like LibreOffice, and hope his ideas advanced, but I mean, not to say like to come up like I'd rather be talking to Wolfram than Libra. But kind of like his like first thing he needs is $1 billion. Well, Wolfram already has that $1 billion, and so you could see the difference that that $1 billion makes. For a guy like Wolfram versus a guy like Libra, that he's got this book and it's hundreds of pages and it's free online. It's got the coolest graphics.
He's probably a pretty lonely guy. He might say yes if we asked to talk to him because everyone's probably like, well.
and like your grandfather, all he did was work. He didn't know how to show emotion, um, and so on and so on. And basically, she's saying like that's why Donald Trump is so messed up. And I was listening, and like besides for Jennifer, I'm sure a lot of people have heard Mary Trump's interviews, and I was saying like Fred Trump like was just a typical German. Those characteristics that she's saying about her grandfather and why Donald Trump is so messed up are just like this, somewhat the stereotypical characteristics of Germans. Like all he did was work. He only cared about work. He was a workaholic. Like he never showed any emotions. He was, completely, cold to his children, and these kind of things where she's giving this tell-all book on like why Donald Trump is the way he is, and then she's kind of apologizing. Yes, I'm sorry, my granddad was a horrible man. What can I do? But I was thinking about it like, and maybe Jennifer doesn't know enough about what's going on to comment. But I was like, no, like Fred Trump wasn't a horrible man. He was just a German, and those are kind of like your quintessential German characteristics.
My dad was just not all that happy to be German, so honestly, I just Don't know a whole lot about
The
it.
characteristic where it's saying like, and all he did was work. He never had time for his family, and when he did, he was cold, and all he wanted from his kids was to, was to work and join the family business, and he didn't care what other people thought about him, and he didn't like showing up to events, and like he spent all his spare time just working, and the kind of thing he's saying like, well, those are in a positive way, like generally that's your positive characteristic of German. So you say like your dad didn't have the German workaholic work ethic, or like the German cold characteristics, where he just wasn't a warm, caring, fuzzy kind of guy, kind of cold emotionally.
For a German, he was pretty warm and fuzzy, and he does enjoy dabbling in mathematics and like spiritualism. But yeah, definitely wasn't like the workaholic type. No,
and even the not that concerned with what other people think about him or other people's criticisms.
He really doesn't give a fuck on a level that I didn't know was possible not to give a fuck. Like,
he's just German.
yeah,
it's like saying your dad is like, he's no Fred Trump because he had become Canadicized or westernized, where Fred Trump really it was a previous generation. Maybe his dad was like Fred Trump, but it's saying like that old school like German grit, work ethic, like stick. I was noticing also, because I want to talk about COVID-19 and going to synagogue and going to the Indian temple, and like we probably won't do a stream on new updated COVID-19, maybe not till the end of the summer, but like the masks and the purification, like general, but just this nature of coldness, of calculating, mathematical. It's like logic. Like I used to joke, it's like like I defeat the blue-eyed man by beating him with his own weapon of logic. Because like Jews, we could use logic, but like generally, we're not convinced by logic. Like you're not going to convince a Jew to change his behavior just because you just demonstrated it's illogical. But Doovid could defeat the blue-eyed man, like through his own weapon of logic. And like obviously there's universal humanism in the characters of these things like logic and step up or lift. So I was mentioning, because everyone's wearing masks, I find that I make facial expressions. Like I almost always keep a stiff upper lip. Very rarely show teeth. Very rarely show any facial expression, smile. Usually just like always poker face. Doovid style. But I find that because I have a mask on, that like I make natural muscle movements with my mouth, like smiling or frowning, or micro facial movements. And I guess out of training, I don't do that without the mask. Like of years of training, I just trained myself to so to say have a stiff upper lip or show as little emotion as possible, as a strategy that to get ahead in society. That's the stiff upper lip, largely maybe European style, Germanic idea. And so ironically, say Doovid, I'm not Germanic. I just trained myself in that Germanic, stiff upper lip style. So under the mask, I actually do like constantly make these micro lip movements uncontrollably.
Is it uncontrollably? Is it motivated by what you're thinking? Or is it just happening?
So I've been thinking about it, like trying to figure out like why I'm doing it. So meaning I don't stop myself from doing it. So just like, like I'm moving my lips around and wondering why I'm doing it. So it's probably connected to dissonance in public situation and thinking in a normal way, that I would probably have a natural tendency to express emotion through lip movements, but I've trained myself to drown out my emotion. And maybe, okay, like Fred Trump was a cold-blooded, blue-eyed blue-eyed man. He didn't need to train himself to drown out his emotion like Doovid does. But with the mask on, where there's no social like type thing where there's a reason, it's like no one could see my lip expressions, I have a mask on. that I just haven't been stopping myself from doing it. And so it's just I'm noticing that I'm doing it. And so so I've realized that I probably always would have done it, and I've just trained myself to in public not show emotion like that. And it's only this experience of wearing a mask that has revealed that to me.
Interesting.
I don't know if you've had that. I don't know if if you need to go around, if you're going, like the experience of going around a mask, or anybody in the chat. I mean, can we ask the chat? Is anyone in the chat who finds themselves making facial expressions they typically wouldn't make under the mask and not stopping themselves? Where typically a person would stop themselves from making facial expressions because of whatever, we just trained ourselves not to do that in public, versus now that we're under the mask, where it's like, okay, why should I expend this extra energy to keep a stiff upper lip? Or is it just Doovid, and it's like, Doovid, you were never really a German, you were just a German Jew, and us Germans could keep a stiff upper lip no problem, and it's only you that behind the mask is revealing that you're fake, your stiff upper lip was actually fake.
Gandalf? The man probably cries at paintings. So, I don't think it makes someone un-German to be emotional. But there's a cultural preference.
Characteristic.
There's a cultural preference towards stoicism, I would say. Because it's like that with the Irish. It's like if you complain about how you're feeling, that means you're sick, and that's no good. You can't even think about being sick. They're all superstitious about that stuff.
Yeah, but the Irish aren't known for a work ethic. So the Germans like that.
Yeah, they are. Of course they are. In Montreal, they were the ones doing most of the labor when they came over.
Well, maybe labor. I mean, God forbid. But I'm saying Germans, when you say like Irish are not known for like all they do is work and work and work. Like Fred Trump, like Thomas Edison, Ford. It's like they worked all day and they get home. And it's like, I think we can do some more work. You're saying that's not like, if you picture like Germans in the best characteristic of that sense, like precision, machinery, being on time. Like God forbid. Those characteristics are usually not extended to the Irish. I mean, although you could argue, like, no, I love the Irish, and the Irish are just as great as the German. But like, no, like any characteristic system.
Their own way. I think they're great in their own way. They can cope with modernity better than the Germans can, and they're a little bit damaged from substance abuse. But on the mystical side of things, which this culture admittedly doesn't really value very much, the Irish probably stronger than the Germans. In a lot of cases, though, the Germans do have their talents, but you see they fall into a particular banding, right? Like, it's mostly physics.
What about this Fred Trump type, saying that Mary Trump's complaints about her grandfather are really the characteristics common to Germans. Like, all he cared about was work. He was a workaholic. He didn't have time for the family. He didn't show emotion, to the family. He wasn't concerned with what the public felt about him, only his work, and saying like, no, that characteristic is not common between the German man and the Irish man. There's other characteristics that are common between all Europeans, maybe blue-eyed men in general, but that characteristic of like the Irish are not known for their fine precision machinery and punctuality and in work ethic, and and even the most famous Irishman, that fighter, he was like showboating, and the dramatic will be the opposite of showboating, where like Fred Trump disowns his own son because he was too cool. It's like, you're not supposed to be cool, you're supposed to work and work because you're German. And it's saying like, no, like that's not an Irish characteristic.
I'm just going based on my own family. Like, they're all incredibly, like, way successful and hardworking. So maybe, I don't know if it's an exception. They're literally almost all like that. The ones that aren't are still very, like, I don't know, energetic, like high energy.
Science, like, like, no, don't go. I mean, you can use your own family, but like science, statistics, it's saying like, no, I mean, saying like Siemens and Vice and like all of like the best machinery in the world, comes out of Germany. Like there's a few Irish companies. Like now Ireland has like cheap IT. Like just recently Ireland has started competing in the realm of cheap IT. There's a few companies um
You just want to poo-poo the Irish, but frankly,
not
I've got
poo-pooing the Irish.
a lot of good things to say about the Irish. I'm not saying every last Irishman is great, but
there is one big tech company, but like no, I'm saying the Irish have some of the same characteristics of the blue-eyed man, like the Germans, but this Fred Trump syndrome of workaholism and work. There might be a few Irish people that are very hardworking and got ahead, but like no, that's not the stereotypical characteristic people put to the Irish, and it shows in a factual element that there's hundreds and hundreds of German companies that demonstrate this excellence, and there's very few Irish companies that demonstrate that excellence.
Yeah, I mean, their skills monetizable more readily for the Germans. That kind of plays into what you're saying about the electrical grid being like needing both Germans and Jews to have come to fruition because they were like both requisite ingredients. So I'm just saying, like, yeah, like
none of those guys were Irish; they were all German.
I get that, like as it is now, like the Irish. What's good about the Irish isn't really incentivized by this money system. So yeah, I'm just saying I still think they're. I know a lot of great people who are Irish, so they're more spiritual. I value spirituality, so like I love that about them. And are the Germans spiritual? It's like sort of, but in a different way, like in that more punctual, technical builder type way, versus like the more poetic, artistic end of Irish. That's not really very lucrative.
Even though your mom was Irish, like she still worked late, and when she got home, she didn't have time for you because she did more work, and she never expressed any emotion towards you. And even though she was Irish,
I don't know how much emotion she would probably not show much, I guess. But she definitely said that she loved us. She's pretty strict, and yeah, she worked a lot.
She was a workaholic where she worked and worked, and when she got
not
home,
just her, like the whole family, like her cousin, incredible workaholic. Her husband, he was, I think, Welsh. I think he was. So he was a total workaholic. Their kids, even the one who was a little bit, rebellious, like they had 5 of them, and even him is a total workaholic. I think he works in construction. But the other ones are all like ultra like successful. Doctor talking like, gosh, I mean, I don't even want to go into it.
It's a universal character trait that anybody, so whatever reason the Germans have exemplified this character trait and are well known for this character trait, and probably correlate and test extremely high in this character trait that around the world, almost all people from all cultures connect this character trait to Germans, but it's a universal character trait and is generally something positive that you would say, oh wow, pretty cool that the Germans have been able to capitalize and on reputation, and that almost all peoples around the world connect that character trait to Germanness. But at the same rate, it's a universal character trait, and anybody through, as Doovid would express it, like actualizing their free will potential, could take their life into their own hands and be more studious like that. And just and certainly in American culture, the work ethic like that is decreasing, although for the 1%, so to say, the people who are mastering the machine and recognize the task ahead of us are almost all workaholics. That you have to be that kind of personality where you get home and like during your spare time, you like to work. You're saying like, if I have spare time, like I'll spend that spare time working, and like my idea of a vacation is catching up on my work.
I don't know if I go that far. Like my mom does like to enjoy herself on occasion, but I mainly remember her being like, she was a school teacher, so she'd always be like marking stuff, and even during the summer she'd be like having to do all this prep and stuff. And I don't know. I think she would classify herself. I don't know if she goes far as to say workaholic, but perhaps busybody. Perhaps she wouldn't like that choice of words, but not in a bad way. Just she seems to get a bit uncomfortable if she's not doing anything.
So ironically, in the East now has captured that you think like Koreans or Japanese, or from the better Chinese that could have that you might think to find this in, and like some like Germany a little bit, but from the quality realm where relatively Japanese or Korean products in many ways are considered better than German, and certainly Irish or something like that they didn't really become competitive on a global technological scientific. I mean, there are a few great Irish thinkers, but like not really. There's not that much scientific.
People used to be afraid of their like chanting power back in the old country. So like I'm sure if somebody better, aka me, was in charge of the Irish, they'd be much more impressive than they are right now. In their current incarnation. And yeah, maybe you have a point about the Japanese there too. Do they corner different markets, or are they just sort of a notch above? Because I haven't done enough research.
Yeah, I think Japanese, Koreans have more cornered electronics, as where Germans have more cornered non-technical manufacture, like precision manufacture, nuclear power, medical machines, like CNC machines, manufacturing machines, as where the Japanese and Koreans have cornered electronics and gadgets, where and also like robotics, it might be a split where there's still competition between German and Japanese companies in terms of like robots, but in terms of like appliances and gadgets, the Japanese and Koreans have taken over, even to the point where in the West we don't even know a lot of their secrets. We like even for iPhones, flat screens, certain computer technologies like Apple and these various things, almost all that's made out there in the Far East, and a lot of that stuff is patented, and we don't even necessarily know how they go about building those things here in the U.S. And it's unclear that we would even be able to replicate such a thing if we wanted to start building our own appliances here. And so in the U.S. there are still appliance makers or electronic makers. German and Europe, you have a few like stereo, like Harry Codman, or various like speaker equipment, or some things that's still like precision stuff that you still find Germanic makers. That so you have found a little difference in niche, in specialty, and there's a lot of cooperation between German engineers in the Far East.
Good to know. Interesting stuff.
Yeah, and I mean that's more the direction I'd like to move, and like I like Libra's the kind of thinking about it, but like also practical science, engineering, and usually the demonstration of scientific knowledge is engineering, understanding trends in technology and society, and even globalism from an engineering supply chain. All engineering supply chains these days are largely global. So you could be a globalist, like a Jewish banker or something like this. But in terms of actual global outreach, engineering is almost always essentially global, because it always relies on a global supply chain. And I went to the Indian temple, and all these people, a lot of them travel all over the world, and it's because they're engineers and work in science, and there's demand for these people basically everywhere that you go. And as opposed for something like banking or different things where there may not be as much demand for someone who could actually build something or do something.
Yeah, good point. I just wanted to get to a couple questions in the chat. Ricardo wants to know which of the Sharp sisters gets the most male attention. There's just I would just it's probably about equal. it's just not on my radar. I cannot give a precise answer on that. I've seen them both get a lot of male attention, though. There was another question. Who is my favorite Jewish physicist? What's his name? I always forget.
Better question. Who's your favorite non-Jewish physicist? You gotta come up with which one of these guys isn't a Jew.
My favorite. Okay, well, let me think here. What's the one who did it on the consciousness? Sorry, I should know his name by now. Thank you. Yeah, Hamroff. Does he count as a physicist, though, is the question.
Penrose.
Penrose, is he a Jew?
Penrose is not a Jew. Penrose is a goy.
Yeah.
And he's a sir.
But Hamroff is
besides for working with Penrose, he is the author of scholarship on black holes or accepted physics. As opposed to Wolfram, who is a Jew. Wolfram is a Jew.
Does Hamroff count as a physicist?
No, he's not a physicist. He's an anesthesiologist. He's not a physicist at all.
Well, I would like to offer him a what is it? What is it when they give the fake degree? I want to give him an honorary physics degree from the Church of Entropy. I hope he will accept it, because the work he has done has pushed physics forward more than, and same with JF. He's in a way becoming a physicist. If he's going to get good, he's going to eventually become a physicist. So back to who my favorite Jewish physicist is, I'm not sure I can answer that question. And as for
Wolfram, I have to go with Wolfram. I mean, he's a Jew, and it's because he's rich. And saying I'm saying he's rich. You're saying okay, all these other guys if they're so smart, how come they're poor? You're oh, you're so smart, and you're sitting there begging money, and kissing people's asses, and so that they give you a few dollars. And here's Wolfram, and he's dude, I'm rich. I'm smart. I understand math well enough that I made my own money and don't need to kiss these people's asses for it. And it just puts him at a whole nother level that, even Penrose or any of these other guys, they just can't compete because they're constantly begging money. It's saying it's the old adage that just if you're so smart, how come you're not rich? And so at the end of the day, when putting it together, I'm going to go with Wolfram.
Yeah. In terms of my favorite non-Jewish physicists, I honestly can't answer that question either, because it's like picking a favorite. It's like asking a parent to pick their favorite child. But in terms of personal personality, what I found interesting in terms of historical figures was Joule was apparently considered a bad luck. I don't know, bad luck followed this guy, but he would basically turn up at experiments and catapult. The experiments would always get messed up. Whenever he was around, it became an urban legend that this guy was basically bad luck in experiments. So I find that mildly interesting, I suppose. But in terms of is there really one that stands above the others, is the question, Jew or non-Jew? And it's is there enough of a difference to be able to pick a favorite?
Well, out of the faces, you have a lot of Green writes a lot of books. Had that Day the Equation, a Jew, renowned physicist, like a Bill Nye. You don't have a lot of the popular faces to the public of physics have been Jews. Maybe even more than 50% of the public faces of physics. Einstein, Feynman. Even today, you're Wolfram, Green, the type people that you might see interviewed, and it's okay, Bill Nye is a goy.
Is he?
Well, I think Bill Nye is a goy, but he's not a great scientist. I don't think anyone would put him in the realm of someone that's actually accomplished in science, let alone the American standard, someone that accomplished and became wealthy from it. It's an Elon Musk as a scientist versus Steven Pinker, or Steven Pinker is more in cognitive science versus but if you're in a hard science, usually like money, if you're such a good scientist, you came up with something that's useful and made a bunch of money off of it. So if you're Steven Pinker, and the best you could do is write books or something cognitive science, you're not going to be able to patent an idea and make a large sum of money of it, or open up your own business venture. the best you could do is like write books and give speeches. But if you're in a field like physics or engineering, it's like, no, I understand physics. I'm going to be able to enter a process, find a process, make it better through my superior knowledge of physics, get a patent of it, and monetize that knowledge almost to the point where there has to be a defect in the scientist if they can't monetize it. Like, you're kind of like Libra, where I was trying to explain to him, like, there's um, canonized methods of monetizing profits. That there's the patent process. There's looking for what transaction, the value proposition, but how you actually profit off of an idea is kind of like a known science. And a guy like Brundle would probably readily understand, like, this is a way you could make money off of something, that's not a way you could make money off of something, or the various ways that you could go about trying to make money off of something, and how much return. But if you're a scientist that really knows your science and is able to advance an area that's pressing, like Doovid's YouTube streaming at the battery show, if you could come up with the better battery, you could be a billionaire. If you could come up with like the better any of these major products that are like the Israeli app designers that try to come up with some better way for a manufacturing process, and then sell it to the car companies or the Silicon Valley and make their large sums of money, to the point where unless a person's like a renunciate who is against money, or has some philosophical explanation for why, as a scientist, they never sought after money. Money is a pretty good measure of how good a scientist a person is. And even like, oh, he won a Nobel Prize or something, that and that, and I'm not so sure if it's like, okay, like who's a better scientist, Elon Musk or some dude who's a professor who won a Nobel Prize.
Well, exactly. It's where it comes back to like how you're judging it, right? And that's why it's like questions like about which is the best scientist become difficult to answer, because you have these sort of clusterings of skills.
Like Einstein, who was always a financial failure, like who, even though
isn't that hilarious? Wow, that's funny.
Well, a lot of the best chess players, example, because you're always teaching chess, and chess helps people make better decisions. And actually, tomorrow night is going to be a call about the Detroit City Chess Club. You'll see, what we're doing moving forward about COVID-19 or online. But even though we teach chess because it helps people make better decisions in life, the best chess players are like, God forbid, make horrible decisions, and like no one would want to emulate the life decisions of the best chess players, even though, like, in theory, who could make better decisions than the best chess players. But yeah, there is some sort of ironic dynamic there, where the smartest minds and smartest scientists, probably because they have to see a world in a way that doesn't correspond to interaction with their fellow humans, like what JF said about George Soros. When he wasn't dealing with people, he was just autistic, looking at charts and numbers and why markets behave the way they do. He made more money than when he was interacting with his fellow humans. And Anthony Storr's book on solitude, I've mentioned many times. Like Alice Miller, The Drama of the Gifted Child. But it's these people that are largely failures with their common man, but has some sort of insight or brilliance that they want to do something beyond their inability to interact and get along with their common man. And so a lot of scientists are like that, where it's like they're so smart, they understand what no one else could understand, but they really just can't get along with their common man. And even Doovid, who studied to be a rabbi, to some extent spiritual, cultish type movements, knows how to baby geniuses, and the same, like you got to change their diapers sometimes because they can't change their own diaper, even though they're adults, and it, God forbid, metaphorically. But at the same time, it's that very reason that like this grown adult who can't change their own diaper because they're thinking about like dimensions outside of the 3D realm that we live in.
Did you see my latest article?
Yeah, not a deep review because I think you just sent it to me right before the show, where I was gone all day. So I just got a chance to skim it. Do you want to move into talking about your article?
It was not about, well, not necessarily. I just wanted to maybe elaborate this concept in the same manner that I had I had sort of analyzed the valuation model. So there's a conservation of valuation. So like there's like only so many things people can perceive as being valuable based on various factors. It's like a conservation of intellectual capacity or of mind computing power. So like they are smart because they are socially inept in some sense. Like those two things are comorbid, I guess. Because it takes energy to be good at socializing, and it takes energy to be good at interfacing with the machine, and there's a zero sum to the energy you can put into it.
Yeah, that's a good model to explain that phenomenon.
Thanks. Yeah, I had another thing that I made. I didn't send it to you, but I can send you the image. It was like an idea of
You just screen share it. You don't have to send it to me.
Okay. Yeah, so it's just like this idea of like how to extract not precious metals, but like valuable stuff from ocean water, because we have all this like excess of exhausted. Because I think like for fresh water, desalination is probably the future, don't you think?
I'm not sure. It looks like, from a carbon point of view, that it's too carbon expensive. Although, might be,
what does that mean? Carbon expensive? Like the process is too energy intensive? Like the reverse osmosis of the water takes too much energy? Is that the argument?
Yeah, there's a net energy loss to desalinate. It's a net harm to the environment because of the carbon intensity of the process.
Yeah, so well, that's something that you can't really avoid. The only way around that is to have better ways of making electricity. Water is something people need, and if we run out, or which we probably will have way less access to it in the future, we will need to desalinate to some extent, even if it's bad for the environment. But this like thing I designed would make it less bad, because you'd take the exhausted water and like through my incredibly dangerous machine would extract sodium solid, as well as hypochlorous acid and hydrogen gas. So it's basically a machine that could really work for something, but making a lot of money, maybe not, because these things that it makes aren't worth all that much, but they do a lot. So it does a lot of work, value, but in terms of like how much can you monetize it, I'm not too sure. So the nice thing about this is it doesn't matter if my examples are out there, because at the end of the day, if you're basically not a hybrid German and Irish, you're probably not smart / brave enough to work a machine that could explode so easily. So do not replicate this machine at home, because you could explode yourself. So it's the German-Irish ocean miner. So they're the only ones willing to take their life in their own hands to that extent to accomplish a feat of engineering. Just a little joke there. I hope it wasn't too racist.
Yeah, so from a monetization level, like, okay, like if your idea is true and it works and you patented it, saying from the fact that you patented it, and saying if you're so smart, you're going to realize you're going to be able to figure out who could monetize this idea, and it's probably going to be an ownership. There's going to have to be a huge company that owns mineral rights or mines and sell it, or a utility company like water, like desalination, that there'd be you like Nestle or something, like a huge company that Coca-Cola, that it's largely in the water business, in a mechanism to monetize it, saying that there's going to be these companies that monopolize water, and this is going to benefit their production level, and to monetize the benefit of your idea within their current model. And if you come up with the idea and patent it, and then you sell it to one of these companies, or whatever, some sort of profit share. You may even be able to get away where
It's
you
just
get.
so easy to explode the thing that I would not want it built unless I could supervise it. That's literally how dangerous this thing is. So I don't want it to go into mass production because I trust people to be stupid. Let's put it that way.
Well, I'm saying the idea, but I mean, but besides, if it's infeasible and it's not, it turns out that it's not really a good idea. But it's saying if it is a monetizable idea, you don't have to be able to, operate a desalination plant. You just have to patent it and understand how it fits, and be able to sell or broker a deal with the person who does. And so this was saying that, Aiken saying in the chat that, yeah, I mean, monetizing entrepreneurship is a different skill than science, and a lot of the mindset that makes a good scientist contradicts the mindset that makes a good entrepreneur. And so hence, a lot of scientists fail at business because the type problem solving that they go about in science doesn't produce good results in business. And so when you have a person like Wolfram who could master both worlds, so from an intelligence level, it's like, dude, it's like, even in the Torah and the Talmud, like, you're allowed to say that to a sage. You're allowed to question the authenticity of a sage, based on their money. Saying, if you know God and the mind of God so much, how come you're not wealthy? And so if you have a reason of renunciation, or connectedness to the wisdom to renunciation, or something like Amasadu, wealth is contradictory, or like, I mentioned the story in the Talmud about the sage who claims that uglier people are smarter, and like, had the beautiful sage been ugly, he would have been a better sage. But like, generally, unless a person actually has a theory like that, that's a sign of a person that understands the world better, if they could convert their ideas into money.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there is stuff that goes on in the economy that doesn't make sense, and science is about making stuff make sense, right? So you have to sort of switch gears, at which point you'd be like diminishing the amount of energy you could put into being a scientist, and probably means something to you. Don't want to let that go. Like you said, what was it, the country boy selling his invention in the city or something? Like, I don't remember exactly.
The country boy, the prophet from the countryside who can't see past the king's harem.
No, it was when you were saying Gandalf was like some goy trying to sell some machine or something. I can't remember how you worded it exactly.
I'm not sure. I might say JF was the country boy.
Yeah, JF's the country boy from
with the high IQ.
The high IQ, right? And I'm the country girl with the high IQ. Claire's caught on to that one. She
yeah, I'm just saying, like, you're not going to be able to come to the city and like become in mastermind banking. It's the vantage point from the countryside to the city point isn't the type vantage point where from the countryside you can't really understand banking, and the type style that I was saying, like, of you have to be City Hall. You're saying, like, maybe Jennifer, because she's a Hindu or knows the Vedas, and it talks about this in scripture, but you're saying, like, yeah, I mean, the government profits, the sages or the elite behind the government profit from running the government, just like you profit from running the temples. You could even profit from administering charities, and so in essence, the elite who profit the most, even if they're not really a righteous elite, but they're just a realistic elite, know that they still have to run society efficiently or properly, and their wealth depends upon it. And so, even like Trump or in America, you're saying the wealthy or the elite have a stronger stake in the system. And from that perspective, the elite in the urban area don't necessarily, but generally have a stronger stake in the system than the elite from the countryside. And the more dynamic key functionings of the state happen in the urban area. I'm saying, like, almost always you could have like a king's castle or something, but like, generally societies ran from the city. It's not ran from the countryside.
No, of course not. Some people ask me to
wearing masks, so I suppose I'm good. Steve Stewart says the moon formed more recently than previously thought, around 4.425 billion years ago, and had a magma ocean 1,000 kilometers deep. There's this new study, which I find
Sorry about that, guys. I just had a bit of a problem with my Hangouts window. I'm sorry, Doovid. Please continue.
Yes, so the scientific-minded person who understands the stuff that we use. And so you don't have to, like the business-minded person who wants to get ahead in society. Like my goal is to increase my own power and money. And I don't care how a car works. I just want to get where I'm going. I don't care how the computer works. Like some Poindexter nerd could do that stuff and like whatever. If he makes his money, he makes his money, fine. Mark Zuckerberg's the richest guy in the world, whatever, fine. I can't do anything about it, but I don't give a crap how, that stuff works. The typical mindset, but you're saying like, no, this guy's a scientist. This guy claims he knows physics. This guy claims he knows science. He can understand how these complicated things that we use in society actually work and could understand the direction of technology and how things are moving and possibly how to benefit that and to monetize it. So you have great minds like Elon Musk or tech, billionaires who understand countless scientific processes, understand the entrepreneur monetization method, patents and manufacture, and are constantly profiting from advancing technology. And Jennifer mentioned it to Libra, and then we mentioned it to the other stream. This idea like knowledge has no diminishing returns, but the monetization of knowledge has diminishing returns. So if it's like Jennifer, I got this great idea that's going to completely change how we desalinate water, and there'll be a monetization period where if it's the best idea and everything gets converted to that idea, but then the monetization period of that is largely over once if it was a better idea and everyone converted to it, then you could no longer monetize the idea. Possibly ownership, somehow you got into a position of ownership where through having my idea change the way business is done, I now became a major owner. Like I was saying that you really have to run the government. Like JF, the country boy with a high IQ, he's not prepared to run the government. If you're in the urban center and you're saying like I'm the true elite, you know that your people have to keep the government running functionally. You can't let the government shut down, or it's going to ruin or function too improperly, or it's going to negatively affect your ability to have wealth and these advancements, enough so that you have to train and use your own family or your own efforts to keep the system running. And so that the country boy with a high IQ would have never invested that intellectual thought in terms of like we're Jews, of course we keep the shit system running. Saying like who else is going to do it? And from that certain perspective, it's like yeah, we profit from it, we want a little benefit from doing it, but like it's a dirty job and there's not like a whole bunch of people lining up to do it.
Yeah, definitely. I just keep thinking about this shift into miners from these like speculative investors that seems to be imminent, and how different the culture is in the mining sector and such. But yeah, basically it would be a way to create instead of creating wastewater that you put back in the ocean, you're creating like something that could be used as a very mild bleach, I think. So I was thinking like you could just figure out a way to just redirect that bleach, and it wouldn't be the perfect thing for the environment, but at least it would have an industrial use. And then it's basically nice because there's basically no it takes care of like the garbage created by the desalination plants. Like I guess I have a hard time imagining how we get by without desalination plants, because I see the like ongoing draining of the aquifers as something that we need to like actively at some point stop doing so that they can sort of refill on their own, because we keep like draining them more and more, and at some point they just sort of have to go back to where they want to be before we can start extracting water again. But yeah, you don't think the future is going to have huge valuation of water, just water as from a desalination thing?
No, I don't think desalination is going to be the direction. I think like it is an issue, but no, I think the stabilization, even like the whatever 3% of global water is non-salt water, or even the tiny percent that becomes rainwater that we drink. But we should talk about these things more.
There's a question. There's a question in the chat from Aiken who's interested in my diagram. Yeah, so the idea is that the thing inside of it is going to cause the sodium to ionize, but then you get an instant problem, right? Because sodium plus water equals explosion. So you have to create a differential magnetic field wherein all of your ionized sodium is going to be hauled into the oil, right? And that way it's in something it can't react with. So what you're looking for in terms of your oil that you're eventually going to use is something that isn't going to be highly reactive with any of the products coming into it. It's just meant to be a medium to keep it in, because it reacts with water and because it can react in just regular conditions. Basically, you get to this final step here, which is on the screen now, and you lift the magnet up into the oil, drop it into a catchy thing, and you leave it in oil. And when you eventually start to work with it, you're evacuating that oil and you're replacing it with nitrogen gas. So you're not really able to take it out into the open at any point. So it's a very high energy system, but I mean, it's a great starting point. Natrium is what sodium used to be called. We should go back to the old name for it. Anyway, that's all I really want to say on that. Hopefully that clears up the question. It was just some thoughts.
And just to review more science, in general, it'd be a good idea maybe to look at some of these cycles. And, so there's the freshwater cycle, there's currents, there's the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle. Basically, everything has a cycle. Oxygen cycle, which means that it goes through different, I don't call it permutations, formations of its material. Like carbon, could be in the ground, like becomes life, where life forms are largely a collection of carbon, and your larger life forms like humans are a huge collection of carbon versus smaller life forms like single-celled organisms or insects. And it'll be a pyramidal structure, and there's the carbon that becomes life goes back into the ground. Everybody knows like photosynthesis and carbon dioxide, that humans breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide, as opposed to plants that do photosynthesis and take carbon dioxide and turn that in sunlight and pump out oxygen. So there's a freshwater cycle, and there's all these various different cycles, and it's unclear whether you need more of it. You're saying that at some point there'll be more water, and even the question of whether this natural, so to say, equilibrium, where there's a certain percentage of the water that's going to be fresh water, and so it's questionable according to these cycles whether desalinization will actually work. And that's why I mentioned the carbon expense of doing it, and but that the energy balance will be that you could only have a certain percentage of water on the planet that will be desalinated, and that even though there might be a good idea, a more efficient way to do it, we're not, that according to these balances of these cycles, no, it's not going to work out, that we're going to be able to sustain bigger human population or stuff, because we're going to be able to like desalinate the oceans. Then so geology is an extremely important subject. It's in many ways the culmination of the physical sciences, and even the multiple truth hypothesis, the very first essay that has a similar idea, is from a geologist, and the geologist is pointing out, how do you explain events? And the reason he says it is because there's all these various cycles that have explanatory power. So if you're a new geology student, you're looking at something like, was it the glaciers? Was it the wind? Was it any erosion? Any of the forces? And you say, well, it was really some sort of combination of all of these things, and that's why you have to have what he called the working method of multiple hypotheses, to recognize that it's not going to be one theory or the other. It's going to be a combination of all the theories at the same time. So even if Jennifer's model, let's say, like, hope, okay, it works and it would be a better process, the implication about like what would that do for the world if we had a better way or a perfect way to desalinate water is still going to be a debate among geologists in terms of how these interdependent cycles balance each other out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even at the current population, I think we are using way too much water. So I think desalination.
There's no such thing as using way too much water because it cycles. The amount of the 3% or whatever of the Earth's water that remains in, like rain and precipitation. The reason we have the reason I think what I'm saying is let me try to make it more scientific in saying all water should be salinated, and there's a limited water resource that's a certain percentage of the global water, and the only reason we have fresh water is because of this precipitation, that even if all the world was ocean, a certain amount of that water would turn into humidity into the air, and the humidity doesn't carry as much of the salination, and that cycle of water makes up all the fresh water on the planet. But it's a geological debate whether that's constant. And so Jennifer's axiom or supplication that we're using up the water is saying could scientifically be,
it's a fact. They've got tubes.
Can't use up water because water.
They've got tubes going from Lake Ontario down to California.
But water can't be destroyed. So it's like
I get it can't be destroyed, but it can be displaced and it can be drained into other places where it ultimately goes back to the ocean and doesn't return to the non-saline water.
Because it precipitate. I mean, saying even if it returns to the ocean, it will still precipitate and come back as rain.
The point is that if they've got Lake Ontario, if they've got tubes in Lake Ontario, they're draining the water. Now, whether that's an issue, you can debate it, but they're nevertheless doing it because they don't have enough water in California for all their crops.
Okay, so this goes back to the Rungakutta and the Wolfram and the estimation methods. So something like the world's current system or these cycles. So we know scientifically there's a law in geology or chemistry for almost everything: the carbon cycle, the Krebs cycle, the oxygen cycle, the freshwater cycle, and so on and so on, for geological systems, where it's believed chemically that different chemicals go through a chain where the same carbon could be in Doooovid, and then the carbon will eventually return to the ground, and just like a plant or something that's an annual that comes up in the ground and then returns to the soil. But the carbon is a constant, and it's based on the fundamental laws of physics that the amount of energy is basically constant, and the amount of water is not being converted to other things. So if water doesn't matter, if water gets put into salt and all the freshwater bodies gets dumped into salt, it doesn't matter, because the sun will cause precipitation and water will separate from the salt and get into the air and come back down as rain. And so from that chemical perspective of this being water is neither made or destroyed. The amount of water, if you look at the amount of chemical substance on the planet, these things are constant. Nitrogen, besides for like nuclear fission or something like that, the amount of chemicals, of elements, periodic elements in the earth is stable. So the amount of water, the amount of carbon, the amount of nitrogen, all of these things in the earth are stable. That amount is not changing. And so therefore, I think it's inaccurate when you say you can't use up fresh water, because fresh water is a constant and it will always be the same no matter what we do.
Well, the Middle East got desertified, and I was going to try to pull up some images of it.
I'm saying you still are scientifically inaccurate. The Middle East, I'm saying you got desertified, but the water, because it got warmer, and the air could hold more water in the air, the ground got desertified, and the ground is no longer holding water. But that's because it is hotter, and hotter air holds more water than colder air. So the water didn't go anywhere. It's not like the water ran away in the Sahara Desert, or even to Death Valley. It's not like the water went away. It's that it's hotter, and the hotter water means that the air holds more humidity, more water.
But isn't it really dry out in the desert?
No, it's extremely humid. I mean, saying because as it gets hotter, it's a fact, hotter air holds more water.
I thought it was dry in the desert, but I guess I don't know much about it. But yeah, I thought it was pretty
about humidity. I mean, isn't like the fundamental law of physics, like humidity, in that hotter air holds more water? Like anyone in the chat, like anyone know basic physics, doesn't hotter air hold more water?
That's below my pay grade. No, just kidding.
So you could be in a desert, and there could be a whole bunch of water molecules, floating in the air, floating in the hot sun, and it's not going to help you because it's all dried out of the land and you can't drink it. But from a chemical level, the amount of water hasn't changed. There's still the exact same amount of H2O on the planet, and so if a certain amount has salt, and there's the totality. So I mean, I think what Jennifer is missing in her calculation here is the totality of an element on the planet. So it's not just the water. What percentage of carbon is in the crust in the earth, and how deep into the crust, and what percentage of carbon is in the atmosphere and the air?
Yeah, there's a planet made of diamonds.
What percentage of water is in the ocean? What percentage of water is in the air?
Yeah, there's a planet made of diamonds, It doesn't mean we can access it, and it's the same with water.
Yeah, but you're scientifically inaccurate when you say we use up water. You can't use up water.
Okay, fine. Use up.
You agree that there's no such thing as using up water. According to your own quantum periodic table, your experiment using up water is inaccurate. There's no such thing.
Removing potable water from easy access. How about that? Draining the moisture of the soil. I mean, you can see it on this diagram that it's happening gradually.
Yeah, but you're not correctly scientifically describing what's happening. So you're saying the current large bodies of fresh water that are being used and recycled in various ways, so there's no longer large reservoirs of fresh water, even though in all likelihood the amount of fresh water will still remain the same, even if these large reservoirs are used. And for the humanity's destruction, it could be like once we use these water up, we're going to be destroyed, even though technically the amount of fresh water on the planet is still the same.
It's just whether it's accessible, Doovid. Like, imagine you have a bunch of fresh water by the ocean, you use it all up, it goes back to the ocean, doesn't necessarily fill the reservoir back up with water, because the reservoir's capacity to hold water depends on many factors, and desertification removes the capacity to hold water. I'm not saying humans are responsible for desertification, but we can accelerate the process, and you can see how it happens. It's like a sunburn. Like, if you just look at this diagram, it's being, you can see it's the parts of the world.
It's narrative versus science. So when you say, when you're putting a moral, you're inserting a moral judgment, and therefore it's causing you to.
Oh, not this again.
Okay, you were right. Like in terms of lexicon, like Doovid, it's not a permutation. It's a
Doovid, I'm not making a moral argument. I was saying it seems to be necessary at some level to desalinate water, given the fact
that because it's not necessary for us to live. Like, it doesn't matter. We could all die. Like, no, we don't need. Like, maybe it's necessary for the survival of humanity to desalinate, but it's a moral judgment that it matters whether we survive. And we could just go extinct. And so the greater reality of the science that includes the possibility that we don't have to survive, we could just go to extinct. So when you say, it's bad that we're using up the water reservoirs, it's on the judgment statement that it's bad because human life, you don't want that to go away, as where you seem to phrase it like it's bad because the water is being used up. So scientifically, you're inaccurate. The water is not being used up. So, if your point was to get off, humankind should take this issue more seriously because it's going to be bad for us. And therefore you incorrectly describe the science by saying the water is being used up.
The fresh water, which is easy to access, is diminishing. It's not used up in the universal sense, but that's I mean, what is your argument? You're saying it doesn't matter if we live or die?
And this quantum periodic table is like, oh, in the quantum periodic table sense, not, but who cares about the quantum periodic table?
Well, you're saying it doesn't matter if the water is accessible or not. And I'm saying, yeah, it does matter because we can't use it unless it's accessible.
You
And
can't use up water. That's what I'm saying. Like, Miss Quantum Periodic Table, like, like unless like you're conducting, a mass energy experience, like you can't use up water.
Anybody agree with Doovid in the chat? I want to know. I mean, I think he's just trolling me, but
I'm not. I want you to acknowledge the fact that the amount of water on the Earth is constant. You don't use it up. I mean, are you disputing that?
Are you going to dispute the difference between readily available fresh water and ocean crud?
I'm talking about H2O.
Yeah, H2O is
it remains constant.
But it could there could be some loss. It's possible that there's a tiny bit of loss, but we don't really notice it. It's tautological, though. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Petrus is saying it's the epic moral nihilist argument. Yes, Doovid, if it doesn't matter whether we live or die, then the amount of water on Earth also doesn't matter. And it's subject to a conservation law, a tautological one. Can't you just see like the pattern of desertification as it literally looks like something drying up? Because
no, but I'm making the point that you should acknowledge, just like I know, it's like I misspoke when I said permutation as opposed to iteration.
So you want me to acknowledge that the amount of water on Earth is constant? It's approximately constant. Yeah, I'll acknowledge that. I'm not saying that it implies that the fresh water supply doesn't matter, because that would be absurd.
I say it doesn't matter, but when you say it's getting used up, that's some sort of misuse of science in order to direct people's action, because you're saying something scientifically inaccurate, probably with the intention of trying to get them to behave in a certain way.
What I'm saying is there's a patch that's dried out that keeps getting bigger. And you're saying, but the amount of water is constant. And I'm saying the patch that's dried out is still getting bigger. And you can almost see the way in which it's getting bigger. Like you can see where it's going to spread. And it may not be a human, and it's partially done by humans, but it's probably majority done just by the entropy of the planet, which is basically like, if you've ever seen something called Brownian motion. Are you familiar with this, Doovid? Brownian motion?
I'm not an expert, yeah, I'm familiar.
But basically on Earth, what you have is Brownian motion, but you have more solid than liquid. So that's sort of what the Brownian motion looks like on that scale when you have more solid than liquid. So for example, you can look this up. Eventually, Africa is going to be basically split down the middle because that state represents a greater entropy state. And this thing's sort of shaking around, eventually finding its maximum entropy state. Like India didn't always used to be part of the continental Asia. It came up. John Wolfe says it's a religious disaster, Doovid. I'm not sure what he means by that. But yeah, I mean, I will admit when I'm wrong, and I think I've conceded as much as I can on this point. But like, I'm not gonna say that freshwater access doesn't matter, because obviously it does. I mean, people need water to live.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously that's true. I'm just saying that to say water being used up is inaccuracy.
Okay, so how should I word it then?
And it appears to be a misuse of science in order to win effect, that they're saying is purposely misrepresenting what actually happens scientifically to win over effect.
Okay, so how should I express it then?
Well, it depends what your goal is. If your goal is to convince people to take water use more seriously, and that you're making a moral argument, not a scientific argument, and then you shouldn't bend the scientific evidence to support your moral argument.
That's really funny coming from you, Doovid.
Why? Because I'm Mr. Objectivity.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so how to express this concern? I
wanted to bring this back to
looking at the factually is that they're desalinating water right now, and they're just dumping the byproduct into the ocean, right? Because they're ultra rich and they don't really need to like whatever, but this would like, it's causing dead zones in the ocean basically, and this would potentially divert that. So
Yes, I want to bring this back to the computers and math and
Sure.
like weather prediction, geological prediction is beyond our mathematical abilities. However, the computers are getting better and better at modeling it. So we understand there's like currents and tides, and even historically, like a little bit, but the exact mathematical calculations, like we understand why hurricanes happen, but we can't predict hurricanes, like saying because it's beyond the mathematical modeling, even if we had the biggest mega computers in the world. I think I had some videos a few weeks back from, I'm not sure if I shared them, about the current state of the biggest mega computers in the world. But if they were doing something like that, trying to model um, weather or tides or any of these geological cycles, saying like, okay, the amount of water, H2O, according to most conventional theories of chemistry, the amount of elements stays the same. I mean, there is such a nuclear phenomenon where you could have particle decay or half-lives, but like generally the amount of chemicals in the earth remains the same, and it just goes through different forms. So you could have H2O that has salt added, and then if it precipitates, it gets above a certain temperature, the water enters the air, and the salt stays in the ocean and separates because the interaction between salt and water is different in the liquid state than in the gaseous state or something like that. But these things we can understand it's some phenomenon, but a model of all of the world's elements or something is even beyond the power of the best computers, and let alone like using artificial intelligence to try to figure out a better way to compute this. But it's just an interesting aspect of what we were talking about, these the mathematics. If we could say, okay, we know the laws of mathematics, but reality is too complicated for us to understand the mathematical explanation of what we have, and even the computers that we try to program to understand this can't accurately model on a global scale all of the phenomena that we know exists.
Yeah. Well, there needs to be some sort of shift in perspective to get to the next level of insight, I think, because just cutting everything down to increasingly smaller pieces starts to give diminishing returns. And maybe that seems to be what a lot of people are sort of running up against. Like, it's a good idea. Why can't you just acknowledge that it's a good idea? Like you seem to get that a lot, but people are like kind of siloed, right? Like, is there another person in the world who can explain Super Librix's idea? I doubt it. So, yeah, Aiken says he's not sure where this argument is going. So,
Well, it's not going anywhere, but I guess because we wanted to talk a little bit about physics and math and Wolfram's new thing. So maybe you'll take a direction, and also guys like Libra, people on the show, to and the people who watch, to encourage them to continue their study of mathematics and even programming, coding, and like the LARP, the scientist LARP versus the scientist, is a big difference. And so hopefully, like we don't want people LARPing as scientists. We want actual scientists.
yeah, it's going to be tough though, because the type of people are probably mostly going to be the Super Librix type, because actual scientists, they're not maybe not that interested in sharing on this level and having their, you were saying last time it was Shark Tank or something. What was the metaphor you used for the show? Subjecting people to scientific rigor.
Well, I mean, at Shark Tank, that generally people act differently because there's money involved, and so why should Super Libra take things more seriously? And even though like his whole thing was about money, like in essence, like he's not going to get paid. There's no benefit coming to him. There's no Mark Cuban at the end who's going to invest in his idea. So it's just a LARP and LARP and LARP, and there's no reason to stop the LARP, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who he is, because like nothing good's going to come to him for us knowing who he is. it's not like Mark Cuban was watching and saying like, no, who's this Super Libra guy? Like really wanted to invest in his ideas. So like he knows that's not happening. He knows his idea isn't developed enough that's even a possibility, and therefore it's just like a LARP. And then past the point of time, the LARP is just a waste of everybody's time.
But we've always talked about how you need a persona to do streaming, so it's gonna have periods where it seems LARPy. I guess it's like maybe a balance between LARPing and seriousness.
No, I'm saying LARP is like, it's like the medicine. It's like you do that because we live in an imperfect world, and you have to act imperfectly to deal with, like the scientist. You're saying you just like, because like I don't know how to interact with my fellow humans. It's too hard to communicate. I have my ideas, but like this communication barrier is too difficult, and therefore you just enter a LARP or character to push past this. Like, is this character who just talks about these issues and created some sort of LARP to do it. So even like scientists that are real scientists also have that LARP element, because generally people don't care what you do. So it's like you go to synagogue or something, you go to your place of worship or whatever your club is, and it's like, well, what did you do all day? And it's like, well, some science and something, and like so the money, it's like, well, how much money do you earn, is more indicative to your average person than what you actually do. And your average person isn't really going to care about the details or understanding of how you do what you do. They want to like what the outcome of that is, and generally the outcome of that is going to be like an amount of money that is like, okay, like what, how much money is it worth to be a doctor or to be a nurse or something like that. And that will the monetization it's really the law could be derived from the law of economics.
I just don't know if it's realistic to be expecting people to take a purely profit-driven motive, because it just seems like
the LARP on like a Libra's level is just saying this will never produce profit. I'm sorry, like there's no way that is ever going to go from that to profit, or the certain. And you're saying, okay, if it's Gandalf, or someone or Claire, and you're saying like, no, I'm sorry, you don't have to be like all business all the time. But I could tell like this is never entering the realm of profit. No way.
Yeah, well, it's a matter of what people are willing to pay for, and that's fine art, right? I mean, people don't really know what they want. They only know looking back.
I mean, you're a Jew, and like, no, I mean, like just like put it up, free market, determine free market value, and you could determine the value of something. You don't have to be like a genius to do it. Like any, you don't have to be a Jew to do it. Like you just get an item and put it out there and see if people are willing to pay for it. And if you take like Libra's idea and say like, no, like I put it out there and like I don't really think anyone's going to be willing to pay for it. And I even mentioned to him a few ways that you could monetize. He didn't even seem interested in like actually making an app that's downloaded, where even with just what he has right now, he could monetize, and he didn't even seem interested in that.
Well, he keeps saying I try to get deeper into his ideas, and I feel like he just changes the subject.
Well, I mean, so from what issue would be, okay, what Super Libra needs, he needs to pay Doooovid $100 an hour to answer his questions. And then, really he doesn't need to do that, but he needs to take himself more serious and the process more serious. So when like Doooovid, basically tell him like that's not going to work. You need to do this, this, and this, or whatever. Or you mean, and I'm just saying Doooovid, but it could be whoever his lawyer or accountant is, and he's like, he doesn't take it. I'm so smart, I'll figure it out on my own. And then eventually he's like, oh shit, like whatever I'm doing is not working. Let me ask an expert, and the expert's like, you got to pay. And but that level of paying is the understanding that you have to do things according to the process. So when you pay, when you eventually get together enough to pay a lawyer or an accountant in your own idea. So like he's at the point like I want money, but he's not at that point. He's at the point where he has to put up his own money. And he's going to have to do that by paying the lawyer and accountant, whoever these things are. But just that process of him taking money out of his own pocket and paying towards that has like somewhat of this purificating process of leaving the LARP, because like the LARP was only so funny when it wasn't costing him money. But they're saying like, are you really going to pay me for the LARP? And like I mentioned that a few times on this Week in Review, like when we had that nurse on, I forget her name. That
Renee.
Renee, where saying like, yeah, but I volunteered in the emergency room, and God forbid, people on the deathbed or in the sick bed are more interested in hitting on the nurse than listen to the doctor. And it's like, so if you picture your average person on the sick bed, and the doctor's coming in, and there's the few nurse, and a lot of those people, they're making small talks with the nurse. They're more interested in that, even though the doctor, relatively at the end of the day, they're paying that doctor $500, $1,000 an hour for their time. So the person sitting there's like, you want to pay me $1,000 for you to hit on my nurse? Like, fine, I'll stand here, but I'm going to bill you for that time. And so when you pay your lawyer or an accountant, and it's like, you want to pay me $100 an hour to pretend like your bullshit's not bullshit, fine. But like, no, your bullshit is bullshit, and the only reason I'm even listening to it is because you're paying me. And at a certain point, the LARP will stop, because the person's like, I'm tired of paying you $100 an hour to listen to for you to listen to my bullshit and tell me it's not bullshit. What I'm paying you for you to tell me is how to do things properly. And then the person has to leave the LARP, and now it's time to leave the LARP and start adapting behavior to be more in accordance with success, according to the information of other experts or best practices.
Does this industry
so
really?
From the LARP, you'll never get to like those that you like. Really. Oh, sorry.
I'm just wondering if a market exists, because it kind of seems like some, state tyranny.
Markets exist. I'm saying you don't need a state for markets to exist. States monopolize markets, but markets are a natural phenomenon of human interaction, of the laws of economics. That you could have something useful to other people, by definition of the law of economics, they will pay you for it. That states have a monopoly on economic systems and set up the economic system through which you could acquire capital for your service to other people doesn't change the fundamental laws of economics and your ability to capitalize on the system. So if you have a great idea that advances science, whether you're in a capitalist, communist, totalitarian, socialist country, you will be able to in some form monetize and advance based on that knowledge. So if it's a communist system where you're not going to actually get a check, but through advancing your ideas, you will become the head of the bureaucracy, you will become from the central administrators of the state. And so in any system, so if it's a capitalistic system where the central administrators of the state are not the most highly respected opinions, and the most highly respected opinions are private citizens who've accumulated their own wealth separate from the state, it might materialize differently than a socialist totalitarian. So if you're a totalitarian system and you're a great scientist and saying like, well, there's this dude and he's in charge, and basically whatever he says goes, and it's going to be like that till he dies, and after he dies it's probably going to be his son, but because I'm such a great scientist, he made me his advisor, and his son will probably keep me on as advisor when he's gone, because I'm that great of a scientist. It doesn't matter. I don't need capitalism. I could prosper in communism, socialism, totalitarianism just as easy.
Interesting.
I mean, it's not interesting. It's the law of economics. I'm saying it's factually the science. If you believe in the laws of economics, it doesn't matter the internal governmental system of monopolizing economics can't contradict the scientific laws of economics.
Is it an uncontested fact that governments create markets?
Yeah, but that's essentially the function from an economic perspective, that the government, markets, you don't need markets to be created. Like markets, supply and demand is a natural phenomenon, that there exist people who have things and there exist other people who want those things. And so you don't need governments to create markets. All you need is, really, all you need is humans. Like if humans exist, there will be supply and demand, and once you have supply and demand, there will be markets to fulfill the mismatch between supply and demand. And how that takes form will depend on a government system, and a government can monopolize the system of transfer. Like capitalism, socialism, communism is a government monopoly on how markets function. But the fact none of those markets rid the fact of supply and demand. There's no governmental market system that could override supply and demand, and so the term of a person who is really smart and understands these phenomenon, there's going to be demand, and if you could have a supply of what's in demand, so to say, you're going to rise to the top. If it means in a communist system, being the head of bureaucracy in a totalitarian system, marrying the daughter of the emperor, marrying the daughter of the authoritarian, or a capitalist system in independently acquiring wealth outside of the government, and then just bribing them when you have to.
Okay, so markets exist, and the government has a monopoly on directing markets, I guess. So it's like through taxes, redirecting something that's already there, basically.
I mean, I'm not a economist. I'm just stressing the point that if you believe in economics, economics isn't something created by the government. Economics is a scientific reality of the material realm, that by scientific law, you're going to have supply and demand, and you're going to have mismatch between supply and demand, and natural processes are going to formulate that handle this natural mismatch between supply and demand. And so from the scientific perspective, it's like an energy entropy type thing, where any system is going to be this science of supply and demand, and an equilibrium between these two forces. And so a government could standardize the mode of interaction in terms of that. Like the fact that there's supply and demand is beyond anything that humans could do something about, but they could standardize the mode of interaction of how do we get the excess supply to or excess may not even be a necessary word, but how do we facilitate the mismatch between supply and demand?
Cool.
So the government can standardize it. So in the U.S., you can't return down money. You can't be a racist. It's illegal. If you have a business, you have to take anybody who has legal tender. You're required to accept their business. And certain systems of capitalism, they're necessary for capitalism to work, and whatever. But if you understand economics, it's just like understanding language. So you could go from Japan to or whatever, one country to the next, and you understand linguistics and the science of language. And so the different languages, and people are speaking about the same basic idea of what is language. You have a lexicon and grammar, and verbs and sentence structure. That economics works the same way, and it's not like you have a different. It's not like communism and capitalism. Neither one of those contradict the fundamental laws of economics. They're just different applications of of how you handle the imbalance between supply and demand. So it would be a societal agreement where you can't have capitalism and communism work at the same time. You either need a cashless central bureaucracy that handles exchanges, or you need a decentralized private market that handles interactions. And so it's hard to have communism and capitalism within the same society, because it's a different method of handling the equilibrium. But one country you could pivot from capitalism to communism, socialism could change, and the overall structure of what's happening is largely going to be the same, whether it's a capitalist or communist system. That you're going to have producers, and then you're going to have an exchange between products of various producers and consumers, and that's going to have to conform to the the pure immutable laws of supply and demand.
Interesting.
We discussed this already a few times.
Yeah. Well, you want to talk about something else?
We could have a shorter show, I guess, this week. There's no guest, and maybe we're trying to make it more science, and I've been talking to Luke Ford a lot like that, and we were talking like modernism versus orthodoxy, and so maybe we should try to return to shorter streams. So people who come on will be less inclined to want to ramble. And I don't mean that they shouldn't have those streams, like space. I don't have any problem with Spaceman or any of your friends. It just means that when people come on Week in Review, they'll be ready to like in a concise way, just kind of like sum up what they're doing in the advancements, and then like whatever, you could stream all day and all night with these people if you like conversational streams. Like I'm not discouraging that. I just want Week in Review to be kind of like this collective where we say like, well, I do kind of want to make progress, and we need this kind of Week in Review to make sure that we're making progress.
Cool. Well, yeah, it was fun to share my ideas for sure, and yeah, hopefully you'll be able to come up with some stuff soon. It's sort of periodic with me. Like sometimes I won't be creative for a while, but it usually comes in spurts.
I mean, when you do your blog post, you might as well. I mean, we're here. I mean, I'll stick around if you want to do your silverback currency.
Wicked. Okay, I'll put it up on this screen. It's pretty long, so we don't have to go through the whole thing, but it basically opens up with like history and talking about just like very local trade. Well, I don't know if the Vikings is really local trade because they were imperialists. The Vikings.
We didn't start with like chemical. I mean, Miss Periodic Tableism and saying like gold. We believe, according to the scientists in the Big Bang, that gold was not created on Earth.
I wanted to save those insights for Week in Review, Doovid.
Well, this is Week in Review. I'm saying, so I'm just mentioning your history of silver does not start with the chemical history of silver. It only starts with the man use of silver.
Yeah, well, you got to start somewhere, and I don't want to have monomania, I mean, I do take the criticism that you don't.
Well,
I don't
not
want
like
to
gold,
start sounding
right?
like Claire.
I mean, I'm not an expert in these theories, but I mean, from my understanding, gold. The experts believe that gold was not created on Earth, and all the gold that we have here on Earth is limited because it comes from pre-Earth sources. And I'm not sure if silver is
stupid.
like that.
That's wrong.
That
Gold
is
scarcity has to do with its quantum state. I mean, you can predict resource scarcity based on two factors, and they just have to do with mass only for the first few elements, though. And then afterwards, it's all to do with proximity to the maximum entropy state, how much there's going to be. So gold is equidistant from two max entropy states, and therefore is going to have a lower amount. And it's going to have that like treasured quality or whatever. Like look it up. The noble gases are in very small amounts, all of them, because they're max entropy states and they're just not as populated.
okay. Well, critique noted, and you would think Miss Periodic Table would start her history of silver.
If I wanted to give a history of silver, the article would be like 10,000 words long. I just try to get them out in bite-sized chunks.
It'd be like Doovid, like not mentioning like someone's a Jew. It's like, so Miss Periodic Tableism is like writing a thing on silver, and she doesn't even mention like silver as an element in the periodic table. It would be like Doovid, like writing a long article about somebody's greatness and like not even mentioning that the like Stephen Wolfram, or like Doovid, like not even throwing in. Oh, by the way, Wolfram's a Jew.
Criticism noted. So yeah, I talked about the Vikings, and then the next sort of one that I included, just to not belabor the point too much, I went into the Rome one. Let me just see here. Okay, it's a little bit further down. So the first thing I looked at was the Roman devaluation. And it follows a definite trend line, which is very interesting, isn't it? And then there's another value like down by 3 in the year 300 and something, because Darius is basically when things went to shit. So, all right, just to go back to it was just because there was like an increase of silver price, I thought it'd be a good time to write about it, and talked about valuation and how asset class valuation is subject to a conservation of valuation argument, and that the perpetual devaluation of base metals, namely silver, allows for the expansion of these markets like they are two sides of the same sort of operation. And
you know what part silver plays in the Bible to Orthodox Jews today?
Why don't you tell us about that? We'll get a little extra background on this.
The dowry. The dowry is mentioned in the Bible. The dowry for a virgin is 200. I forget the biblical weight of silver, and for a non-virgin, 100. And so today, the marriage contract, there's something like the ketubah, the like agreement that you're supposed to. The dowry basically is based on the price of silver, because in the Bible, the dowry is listed as an amount of silver. So still till today, for Orthodox Jews, the dowry is largely based on the price of silver.
Very interesting piece of trivia there.
I don't know, Vita, I mean, like the dowry is a common idea, not just in Judaism, but in Judaism, it's in the Bible, that's something that's listed in the price.
Who pays who?
Well, there has to, I mean, generally the bride, the husband, for this type of dowry, there's different type of dowry. So this dowry is what the husband pays usually to the bride's parents in the olden system. And these days there's no payment, and there might be like a divorce type contract or the marriage contract where the man is including to take care of the woman in monetary needs, and that is kind of referred to in the amount, like if there should be a divorce or some sort of bad thing should happen, that the husband agrees to take care of the wife within this measurement of like 100 or 200 weights of silver. So usually there's not actually a monetary transfer, but I mean, in the olden days, it probably would have been a direct payment from either the husband to the parents of the girl, or from the parents of the husband to the parents of the girl. And it probably would have actually been that way to silver. So in ancient times, presumably, like at the time of marriage, that literally like that you would give the girl's parents like a certain weight of silver. That was like that was how we did it. That's what it says in the Bible.
Yeah, it sounds like a matriarchy. The as you probably know, Hindu system is the dowry goes to the husband. He's got to pay to whatever it is. Different valuation, I guess.
Well, anyway. in a scholar or a really good man, might get a sum of money from the parents of the daughter, but the biblical obligation of dowry is to the parents of the daughter, because according to the biblical system, the daughter is actually possessions of the parents, so it's actually kind of like buying the daughter off of the parents to some perspective. And that amount, like how much is your daughter worth, and it's in the Bible, it's in silver. It's that they determine that value to be a certain weight of silver. So definitely worthy of mentioning here in Jennifer's dissertation of silver prices.
So I then go on to explain the shift in reserve currency status, and how it's been pretty much like not the exact same amount of time, but a similar amount of time. I'm sure you've seen this graph before. And I'm just basically trying to explain that what happens next is very hard to predict because the situation is unprecedented. So it's really hard to call like which of all the factors is going to be the deciding factor in the outcome. And I've listed the availability of internet information is unprecedented. It's really unclear how much that can affect things, right? Because on the one hand,
I mentioned that they, like all kind of these systems of vector fields is it will seek the closest point of stability. So, when the U.S. Dollar system crashes, there'll be an effort to seek stability in wherever, in terms of money, wherever people could find stability, that's where they'll go. And if that remains stable, that will become the next reserve currency. So if the US dollar collapses and people start seeking stability in China, and then China collapses, they'll have to seek stability somewhere else. But if they start seeking stability, in like a Chinese system and it works, then the next reserve system will be where the people sought stability after the last system crashed.
Makes sense. And I've got the global interconnectedness of the US dollar as a trade vehicle, which is unprecedented. 88% of your Forex trades are carried out in US dollars. And you've got the petrodollar on top of it. So it's like a double padding of inertia to keep it as the reserve currency, just because it's what's already there on such a level that is sort of unprecedented. Because as far as I know, like petrodollars, I don't know, is that a thing?
Well, it's like you're saying that, you're essentially agreeing with my claim that the fundamental laws of economic supply and demand are almost like material law. However, the standard of carrying out transactions has taken a certain form, and it becomes easier and more efficient to balance supply and demand when you have a single standard, and that currently that standard, being the U.S. dollar, that's the standard through which interactions throughout the globe are carried out at such an overwhelming percentage.
All right. And then you have to also consider like what's happened in London City. Like there's still a significant amount of trade going on there, even if it is in US dollars, right? So there is some institutional inertia. Maybe it's just forever. I mean, Rome is still technically there, or the Vatican, I mean. Whether crude oil is a renewable resource, I kind of got into this a couple of times on the show, but it might be, or might be quasi-renewable. The fact is, the research hasn't really been done. So since the petrodollar thing's obviously got some salience, it's a question that needs to sort of be answered, like whether it's exhaustible or not. I think sort of informed whether it has the potential to be used, somehow. And I learned throughout doing this, it was actually really fun doing this research. I learned that Venezuela, the government's trying to institute a cryptocurrency, a cryptocurrency, which was my fourth thing, which I went into a bit of an explanation there. What it is, I mean, it's sort of like you have to sort of already know what crypto is to be able to read this, but I think probably most of the audience is on that wavelength. A couple of interesting statistics were that 8% of the US already uses Bitcoin. That seems really high, doesn't it? I mean, that's what I found, but it seems really high.
Yeah, I doubt that 8%. Like I would guess it's even much less than 1%.
Yeah, me too. But that's what I found. I mean, it could be a wrong statistic, but that's at least what they're quoting. And I got 88% of clients net long off the Forex website there. That's crazy. 88% of people investing in this thing are expecting it to go up. So that's what that means. And I got a little screen grab from what I thought was kind of funny, that this new Petro crypto was being rated by risk rating websites as a scam, like a government-backed crypto. And then number 5 was the precious metal, because like you follow, like, I'm sure you've seen that movie, The Big Short.
I don't really watch movies.
Oh no, have you heard of it?
I'm not sure. It sounds vaguely familiar, but does not bring anything to my head.
It's based on a book about these guys who placed a bet that the mortgage-backed securities industry was going to be like have a run on, or something that was going to happen. It was going to collapse. Anyway, it's talking. So it just sort of seems like there's this like momentum of people who are shifting markets through speculative investment, and that energy could be, if it's directed into precious metals, mass, that could shift things quite a bit, because analysis that exists right now is that peak silver will happen within basically the next 15 years. And the peak behavior definitely affects things. It hasn't so much affected it with petrol, but then again, we could be looking at a situation where there's no such thing as peak petrol because it's a renewable resource. So again, that's where there's a bit of a nebulous question mark. Some more research said that 15% of Americans can already own investment grade silver, meaning they're sort of betting against the currency, I guess. Slash, you know, I tied it to the buying or the tipping point. Are you familiar with Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point?
Oh, yeah.
I put it into like what would happen if everybody went to buy silver at the same time, because it became like a trend or whatever. And I think if public trust collapses to a point of like being irreparable, this type of arrangement may eventually just be what everyone does because there's just no trust to do anything else. So, I mean, I'm not saying for sure that'll happen. It's a possibility. I think it's a way to, if you let silver stop being market manipulated, it's a way for people to store their labor value. Like, it's a more direct measure of labor value, and it has value in labor because of its industrial uses. So if it was in circulation wherein like it was actually worth it to buy and trade in it, like it couldn't be too expensive, couldn't be too cheap, but it would be an easier way to control your labor. Like, it would be harder to devalue labor if silver was allowed to trade at what people were willing to pay for it. Yeah. And then I talked about running out of silver and why no solid backed currency works, which is why I eventually want to like look at some type of a hemp coin where you're like growing money. And to do that, you'd need to basically build your economy around hemp. So basically make it such that hemp is valuable in your economy. And then you could just make grow your own money, quote unquote. And that could work as long as it's sufficiently valued throughout the economy. Like, I was thinking you could build a house out of it. And it's probably not a great long-term house, but you could have like a couple of things that were long-term that you would just take out and, burn the house down every 20 years or whatever. It's pretty good stuff. It seems to be able to rehabilitate land, hemp, and it takes a lot less. It's a lot less water intensive, which may or may not matter if you care about living or dying, which ultra nihilistic Doooovid doesn't. So yeah, thanks for listening. That was my article. Hope you like it. I was just trying to draw it all together to like an overall shift in perspective in terms of like how we use things. Because like if you think about it, there's only 26 grams per person of gold in the world. And that's just not that much. John Wolf says they think hemp it comes from the devil. Devil's weed. It's green. Isn't the devil red? Are you speed reading it, Doovid?
I was doing my eBay, managing my eBay. I hadn't checked it, so I just popped it on and got all caught up looking at that. So maybe I did kind of want to cover eBay, but I got kind of a headache.
Yeah, why don't you? If you want to tell us about eBay, I'd be down to listen. That sounds like fun.
Well, I kind of had a headache tonight, so I'm going to do my show. I probably have to do a screen share, and we could. I would be able to use my eBay account as a active example of a lot of these certain economic concepts and other things. But I get kind of headache right now, so maybe we could just end the show, and it might be better that we start making these a little shorter, to try to incentivize more progress, and or the people that are involved to try to put more homework or effort into I mean, they don't have to, but just try to take people's own ideas and academic pursuits more seriously.
Awesome. I hope your head feels better soon, and thanks for joining us. Thanks to the audience for tuning in. It's been a great time. And thanks for listening to my article. I hope it was a little bit informative and inspiring of hope.
Definitely. Okay, are you going to stay on, or you're going to shut down, or you got clips or something?
I didn't actually make any. I was too engrossed in my writing, but yeah, I'll probably just wrap it up unless anyone has any last-minute questions in the chat. And yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go. If you want to talk to the chat, that's fine. So great week, a great streaming, and hopefully, see you next week, and hopefully some of these new things in direction like mathematics or Wolfram might lead somewhere.
Yeah, we can take a look at that in greater detail, and who knows, maybe we can take on the project of trying to map my system into his axiomatic architecture. Could be a good exercise.
Yeah.
I'll have to look at it more deeply.
Okay,
right.
Have a great week.
You too. Bye-bye. All right, guys, if there's no last questions, I'll just say goodbye for now. Thanks everyone for listening, and I hope you find everything interesting. And yeah, I thought it was a pretty good article for like how stars are formed. I think it's a pretty compelling argument. So that's the article right after the latest one. So please check that one out too if you're interested in cosmology at all. Tried to keep it pretty beginner friendly, but yeah, the exclusion principle, the uncertainty is very hard to get one's head around, but it is possible. So don't give up. Bye-bye for now.
Yeah, but that's just, so to say, a worthless opinion of...
It's so important that she can't be told, she won't be told that it's wrong. And
bringing it back to Church of Entropy and her attack dog, Gandalf the White.
Why don't you learn to shut up and fuck your goddamn logic?
They control the media, and the media is capable of making the sheeple believe in anything.
Yeah, I don't mind. We've had these streams, and I've been doing with Church of Entropy, and she's been bringing on new people, and like we did like stream etiquette. We walk through like the technology.
I have like very strongly negative opinions of the kind of Brundle clique.
Is she trying to garner herself cult prestige by associating herself with a retard?